You've had restricted playing time lately, but you reached 25 minutes tonight. Was there any discussion regarding you being pulled, or did you decide you simply weren't leaving the court? Steph knows better than to try that. The training staff knows better too. They'd get an earful from me. That smirk told the whole story. When asked about her minutes cap, Caitlin Clark didn't bother giving a scripted, PR-friendly response. She effectively told the media, the coaches already knew better than to challenge me. I mentioned to Steph at the break that I felt great. I didn't want this loss, and honestly, I'm committed to doing whatever is necessary to keep my body right before we go again tomorrow. And, like I've said, I have total faith in the work I invest in my physical conditioning. I dedicate so much effort to it, and rely on the people supporting me who've truly helped. I find real confidence in that preparation. So I know my routine is working, and there was zero chance I was exiting that game during the fourth. It made no difference. That is the exact moment this matchup shifted from a high-scoring performance into something far more significant. Because this wasn't just Caitlin Clark finding her rhythm, this was her drawing a line in the sand. She'd been navigating a return from absence. Her workload was monitored and restricted. The designated plan shared during that press availability was a 2 5-minute cap. But when the final period began and the score remained tight, with Indiana desperately needing a leader, she had no intention of observing the climax from the sideline. The essential takeaway isn't the stuff about playing through injury. It's the declaration that there was no way she didn't care, was exiting the contest in the fourth. That confirms she had already resolved the issue before the staff could intervene. And as we continue, the real question isn't whether keeping her in was the right move. The real issue is why the Fever required her to push back in the first place. Because the stats from this game make the entire minutes debate appear completely ridiculous. This is huge, people. Caitlin Clark is finally asserting herself. She is finally doing what we've hoped to see. She is standing her ground against Stephanie White. Caitlin logged 29 minutes, delivering a record-shattering outing in that time frame. She wasn't slated for 29 minutes. She simply refused to sub out. Stephanie White and the Indiana Fever were prepared to pull her, but she basically said, "Forget that, I'm not leaving, I'm staying in." That is the narrative the creator is highlighting, that this was Caitlin asserting control, finally asserting her own agency, pushing back against the Fever's tendency to treat her like a subordinate player, rather than the centerpiece who deserves their total confidence. You aren't obligated to. Who agree with that narrative, of course. Sabotage is a heavy accusation. Yet, based on the transcript's evidence, we can confirm there was a set minute cap. We also know she went over that limit, and Caitlin clearly stated she had no intention of sitting during the final quarter. Anything beyond those facts is merely speculation and personal take. But the reason that viewpoint resonates with so many fans is that they have observed a recurring trend. Every time Caitlin is pulled after a short stint, or whenever she starts finding her groove only to be sent back to the pine, the same questions arise. Are the Fever simply looking out for her health, or are they stifling the very qualities that make her such a threat? This game felt like a referendum, precisely because she didn't just log extra playing time. She used those minutes to showcase the high-level performance that supporters have been clamoring for, the Fever to unleash. So, Caitlin Clark was scheduled to be benched at 25 minutes. But she refused. Right. And it's moments like this that prove the Iowa-era competitive fire, that killer instinct remains very much alive. Okay, let's dive into this statement before we show the actual footage. She noted, "I'm fully aware of my own potential and what this roster is capable of. My mission is to lead us to victory and help us become the top team in the WNBA, and I don't believe we're there yet. Therefore, it is my burden to get us to that level." That sentiment matters, because this transcends a single basket, a record, or a soundbite. It is Caitlin Clark expressing the heavy responsibility she feels toward this organization. I know what I'm capable of. That is pure confidence. I know what this team is capable of. That is veteran leadership. But she goes further by framing the Fever's success as her own personal duty. And that perspective carries significant weight, because most players in their second year don't speak like this after a high-stakes game. This is how the face of an entire franchise speaks when she recognizes that every outcome, every national broadcast, every sellout game, and every viral highlight inevitably gets tied to her legacy. The front office might call it load management. Supporters might call it mismanagement. Critics might call it a gamble. But Caitlin is making it clear. From her perspective, she has a job to finish. And that job isn't about maintaining comfort. It's about elevating Indiana into a championship threat. When an athlete believes that deeply in her own mandate, a minute restriction stops being a medical decision and becomes an obstacle, balancing discipline and competitive fire. Let's hear Caitlin Clark's take on reaching 451 assists, a new club record. Plus, she and Kelsey teamed up for the highest combined total in team history, netting 75 points. It was quite a spectacle. That pivot, the point is where the actual gameplay starts to overshadow the cautious narrative. Caitlin put up massive numbers. Kelsey Mitchell matched her intensity, and together they accounted for 75 points, marking the most prolific scoring tandem in Fever history. This is significant because it shifts the focus from sentiment to logic. If the team's primary playmakers are performing at such an elite level, why would the franchise intentionally bench either of them during the most critical minutes? The coaching perspective also holds some validity. If Caitlin is dealing with a recent injury or struggling to regain her full momentum, caution is hardly an unreasonable approach. Coaches and medical staff must operate with the bigger picture in mind. Their focus encompasses upcoming matchups, future playoff implications, and the danger of turning a single stellar performance into a long-term setback. Yet, the counterargument is undeniable. Professional games rarely wait for optimal circumstances. When your star insists she feels capable, when the scoreboard is tight, when the team has proven vulnerable in her absence, and when she is clearly in the zone, the burden of proof shifts. It is now up to the staff to justify her removal, not the other way around. That is why her statement resonated so effectively. Caitlin wasn't ignoring her physical limits. She was relying on the rigorous preparation she invests in her body. That's a fundamentally different claim. Caitlin, how did this matchup feel for you? Honestly, some evenings, you just have that feeling, even before tip-off. And I sensed it was going to be one of those nights. Obviously, I've had a tough time finding my rhythm again after being sidelined for a few weeks, so I viewed this as a prime chance to play aggressively right from the start, knowing my teammates really needed it. While AB was sidelined, I realized I had to rise to the occasion, and I was able to draw fouls and get to the stripe frequently. Consider how she describes the performance. She isn't speaking like someone who stumbled into a rhythm by chance. She insists she knew, before the ball was in play, that this could be a standout game. That's the Iowa-era Caitlin Clark resurfacing. The athlete who expects to impose her will long before the opponent can react. Furthermore, there is a crucial nuance in her response. With Aaliyah Boston out, Caitlin recognized her team required a more assertive performance from her. With AB sidelined, this isn't merely about stats, it's about reading the situation. Without her, Indiana misses a crucial defensive hub, a leader on the floor, and a reliable presence in the paint. That forces the perimeter players to take on more offensive load, trigger defensive rotations, draw contact, and maintain production whenever the defense falters. So, when Caitlin mentions needing to be aggressive early, that represents the tactical justification for why she couldn't just be handled like a player on a typical minutes restriction. The Fever lacked their typical safety net. They required her to put pressure on the opposition from the tip-off. Once she found her rhythm, the momentum shifted entirely in her favor. That is how a calculated plan can look prudent before the game, but appear obsolete by the fourth, getting to the charity stripe frequently. It feels good to see shots dropping. I managed to earn some fouls and, well, the officials were finally blowing the whistle on something. It was about time. Truly, while our defensive effort was frankly poor, you have to credit our resilience. I believe we were trailing by 8 or 6 points with 4 minutes left, somewhere around there. Yet we consistently discovered a path forward. And, this is where Caitlin's perspective feels more genuine than the highlight reels. She admits the defense was subpar. She notes the necessity of mounting a comeback. She describes battling from behind late. That distinction is vital because it avoids painting an overly polished narrative. This wasn't a pristine fever outing where everything fell into place and the coaching staff could simply step back. Indiana dealt with genuine, glaring issues. The defense was being pulled apart, Boston's absence was felt, and the score was tight enough that one poor sequence could have drastically altered the outcome. And that is exactly why Caitlin staying on the floor is the core of this story. In a blowout, extended time isn't needed. In a chaotic, tight game, superstars represent the difference between winning and analyzing another missed opportunity. This is also where Kelsey Mitchell's performance deserves recognition. Those 75 total points weren't just Caitlin's work. Kelsey's output was pivotal. And when both guards are locked in, Indiana becomes a nightmare for defensive schemes. However, the debate isn't about Kelsey's capability to score. It's about who dictates the pace, who manipulates the defense, and who holds the reins when things get intense. Tonight, Caitlin ensured the answer was not left to the bench. I suppose, I'm not sure. It really just comes down to belief. Nights like those are bound to happen, and you must mentally prepare yourself to embrace them. I truly believe that was my approach. You know, things won't always fall into place. Sometimes you encounter a rough patch where the shots just aren't sinking, but you can't let that rattle you. I rely on the time I've invested and the faith others have in me. Above all, I possess self-belief. Sometimes you have to really plant your feet. When the momentum shifts against you, the world doesn't stop. You need to pivot, find ways to contribute, lift your squad, and improve our collective performance. I feel like that sentiment perfectly captures a pure shooter's mindset. She's explaining that you have to maintain the conviction of your success before the shots actually fall. It's visualization. You rely on your training, and even when the ball hits the rim, nobody cares about the misses. You just find another avenue to influence the outcome. This is why Caitlin Clark triggers such intense discourse. People fixate on the deep shots and the record stats, but the true force driving her isn't just distance. It's sheer defiance. She misses, keeps attacking, gets hit, keeps attacking, gets pressed, keeps attacking, faces criticism, keeps attacking. In this match, that relentless mentality extended to the playing time limit, because someone who refuses to be deterred by a cold streak is never going to accept an arbitrary cap forcing her off the floor during the final, decisive moments. This is where the Fever are navigating a tricky tightrope. You crave that intensity. You absolutely require it. That energy is what packs stadiums and makes opposing defenses scramble. However, you must manage it without extinguishing the spark. Over-managing a talent like Caitlin might dull the very competitive edge that defines her greatness. That is exactly what the audience is sensing. It isn't merely about the desire for extra minutes. They want the team to truly acknowledge her caliber. You forced a turnover, hustled back toward mid-court, and just went for it. Can you break that down? I think that basket gave you 41 points and put you ahead. Walk us through that play. Well, we had possession with the score even, and they shut down our initial set. They played tight defense and managed a deflection, but I tracked it down. I managed to knock it loose. I'm not sure if I clipped her arm or if it was a clean steal, but I doubt the official was positioned to see it clearly. I felt it was a fair play. Honestly, I just wanted to make a smart play on the ball, and then obviously transitioning back, I was trying to get the ref to restart the game. Immediately, I wanted to push the tempo before they settled into their defensive shell. I believe that is. It's honestly simpler for me to operate in open court scenarios rather than needing to draw up a set play. Near the sideline, I can kind of just wing it a bit more, and that's essentially the approach I took. She managed a few solid defensive touches, forcing me out of my rhythm, but I pivoted back to my lift and it dropped. That felt great. Now, this specific moment is exactly what should give league defenses nightmares, because Caitlin isn't explaining a rehearsed, tactical sequence. She is describing pure disorder. The design falls apart, the defenders swarm, the rocks spill loose, and instead of waiting for a breather, she wants the ref to put the ball back in play immediately. That distinction separates a player craving comfort from one demanding authority. Caitlin refused to let the defense organize. She didn't want a static lineup. She wanted pace, mayhem, and room to improvise. And that is precisely where she becomes lethal. It isn't because the Fever ran a brilliant sideline set, but because she deciphers a messy sequence quicker than anyone else on the court. A fumbled ball transforms into an asset. A frantic scramble becomes a fluid bucket. A defensive unit that believes it has successfully stifled the possession suddenly finds itself trapped in the very scenario she thrives in. This is significant for coaching philosophies because not every athlete benefits from rigid structure. Some require a cooled play to score. Caitlin, however, constructs the play once the original plan breaks down. When observers wonder why supporters grow weary of strict rotations and formulaic playbooks, that is the reason. You cannot fully dictate the output of a player whose finest highlights emerge after the playbook is discarded. Caitlin, you touched on this briefly, but regarding that defensive swipe defense has been a major talking point surrounding you throughout your career. It's always a primary target for opponents, so to step up as a defensive anchor right there. What was that experience like? Well, I recorded 4 steals and 2 blocks, and that defensive contribution is precisely what elevated this display. Beyond your typical high-scoring outing, 4 steals and a pair of blocks from Caitlin Clark isn't just some superficial stat line. It reshapes the narrative around her capabilities. For a long time, the easiest critique of Caitlin was that she was a defensive liability. Opponents were eager to test her mettle. Sturdier guards tried to muscle through her. Speedier guards looked to drive past her. Physical squads aimed to exhaust her on both ends of the floor. Consequently, her jump shot suffered late. But tonight, she was making pivotal defensive plays when Indiana desperately needed stops. This doesn't mean she suddenly evolved into the league's premier defender. By her own admission, her performance could have been sharper, specifically during the opening half. However, this reality effectively dismantles the lazy narrative surrounding her as providing elite, offensive output, clutch shot generation, relentless free-throw drawing, and generating additional possessions via steals and rejections makes it impossible to criticize her playing time. You aren't just benching a simple scorer, you are removing an athlete who influences every facet of the game. That explains why this outing felt distinct. The statistical output was eye-catching, but the two-way impact made her influence impossible to ignore. Quite rare and truly impressive. I feel like my performance could have been a bit more polished, especially early on. They managed to isolate me a few times and get penetration, and their guards are exceptionally quick. Their perimeter players are honestly elite, and clearly their front court presence is fantastic as well. But honestly, we could have done a better job supporting each other on the floor. Whether it was my responsibility to rotate on penetration or other lapses, we simply didn't maintain that consistency. They are high-level players with an impressive young foundation. Truthfully, they are a roster to monitor in the coming seasons. They present a challenging defensive assignment, particularly when AB is sidelined. I think this highlights just how vital AB is as a defender and how she serves as a defensive anchor along with her ability to direct the team. Plenty of players stepped up in her stead tonight, but she is the dominant force for us on that side of the court, consistently holding the right spot. She always grasps the correct defensive scheme, and she cleans up the... This highlights a sharp, insightful moment in Caitlin's media availability, because even while enjoying an incredible personal performance, she redirected the focus toward Aliyah Boston. She underscored AB's importance as a defensive pillar, her communication skills, her rebounding prowess, and her aptitude for positioning. This serves a dual purpose. Initially, it clarifies why Indiana's defense seemed disorganized for significant periods. This wasn't merely a lapse in effort. They were missing the teammate who coordinates their defensive alignment. Furthermore, it demonstrates that Caitlin understands that being the team's marquee star doesn't equate to pretending she operates in a vacuum. She can acknowledge her duty to elevate her play in Boston's absence, while simultaneously ensuring everyone appreciates the impact of Boston's missing presence. That is true leadership. It is also why the Fever's ongoing trajectory is so compelling. Indiana reaches its ceiling not through Caitlin competing against Kelsey, against the coach, or trying to carry the load entirely solo. Their highest potential arrives when Caitlin drives the momentum, Kelsey punishes the opposition in transition, and Boston anchors the interior. Management should develop a framework that enhances the experience, rather than making every single choice feel like a constant bargaining session. But as long as that plan remains experimental, high-stakes games turn into a trial of faith. The report stated her cap was 25 minutes. However, Caitlin Clark hit the 30-minute mark. She defied the coaching squad, and she flatly ignored the medical staff. I am not heading to the sidelines during the fourth quarter. No way am I. I'm going to sit there and watch us throw this away. We had a 1-2 point buffer when I was pulled in the second and third, and you guys wasted it while I was stuck on the bench. I'm staying in. Let's examine what Caitlin Clark claimed. This highlights the most compelling aspect of the creator's argument. Even if the rhetoric is heated, he identified a very relatable fan frustration. Once Caitlin heads to the bench, leads can evaporate, momentum stalls, and the entire nature of the match shifts. While the specific 1-2 point lead mentioned is the creator's personal take rather than an official statistic, the broader point resonates with anyone familiar with star-centric professional basketball. Some athletes provide more than just raw stats. They dictate the team's entire psychological flow. With Caitlin on court, the opposition is forced to scramble before the play develops. The crowd is energized. Teammates hunt for passing lanes, knowing a single defensive lapse leads to a triple. That intensity disappears as soon as she checks out, causing the game to feel suddenly hollow. That's why, in a Caitlin Clark contest, minute caps are never purely about medicine. They become tactical. Every moment she rests, the opponent finds relief. Every mandated break allows Indiana's offense to lose its cohesion. Short bursts of play risk breaking a rhythm shooter's flow, causing her to struggle with consistency. And when the player herself says at halftime that she feels great, the staff must reconsider if their rigid strategy still aligns with the reality of the game. She essentially suggests Stephanie White and the trainers should know better. I would have lost my mind. I'd have given them an earful. They would have heard exactly what I thought if they tried pulling me. She wasn't having it. This is Caitlin Clark taking charge, giving that intense stare. I don't care what the screen says. It might show 25 minutes on the scoreboard. But I dare you to try and sub me out. I'll rip into everyone on this sideline. You guys, I thought I was dramatic with the refs. You thought I blew up at the officials. Just try taking me out of this game due to some minute limit, and see how I treat you on the sidelines. This is clearly a theatrical, dramatized interpretation, but beneath the commentary lies a genuine evolution in Caitlyn's public demeanor. Throughout her rookie run, she has aimed to doing what's expected, supporting her peers, showing coaches deference, and deflecting attention, even when the narrative is clearly centered on her. Yet, her reaction carried weight. It wasn't disrespectful or impulsive. It was assertive. The coaching staff understands better than that. The medical team is well aware too. They were given a piece of her mind. That's hardly an athlete, passively taking orders from the sideline. It marks the shift from being controlled to being an active participant. For the Fever, that distinction will grow increasingly critical as the stakes heighten, because high-profile stars in intense environments require more than just pre-arranged protocols. They demand collaboration. They deserve honest dialogue and their own intuition regarding their health, and the match flow should carry significant weight. The bench can still decline her request. They can still prioritize her safety. But if the communication flows in only one direction, this friction will persist. And the more Caitlyn plays at this level, the more difficult it becomes to ignore her input. That is the fundamental power dynamic viewers witnessed tonight. That was an incredible performance by Caitlyn Clark on both ends of the court. Deflections, rebounds, steals, playmaking, everything. Caitlyn Clark put on an absolute masterclass. I'll be broadcasting live for the matchup against the New York Liberty tomorrow. You'll want to be sure to tune in. We had over 2,000 people in the chat today and had a blast. So, don't miss out on tomorrow's game versus the New York Liberty for the Clark experience. Head to the comments section and tell me your take. Caitlyn Clark is finally asserting her authority. Now the Fever head into their next contest with a unique challenge. It's a positive one, but a challenge nonetheless. Caitlyn just reminded everyone what happens when she is trusted to define the moment. She produced points, defensive stops, disrupted the flow, pushed past her barriers, and turned a debate over her playing time into a definitive statement. That doesn't mean the Fever can simply discard all caution indefinitely. That would be a superficial takeaway. The real lesson is far more complex. Indiana must develop a framework where Caitlyn isn't forced to fight for autonomy whenever a game enters the final minutes. Because if she is fit to compete, she shouldn't be treated like a mere bystander. If she is restricted, be transparent and stick to the protocol. But if the outcome hangs in the balance and she confirms she is prepared to go, the Fever must weigh the consequences of pulling the ball from the hands of the single player. The crowd paid to see and the opposition is terrified of. This was more than just a stat sheet filler. It was Caitlyn Clark showing Indiana that her worth extends far beyond scoring. It lies in her command. Command of the pace, command of the tension, command of the arena, command of the situation. And that is why this performance resonates. It wasn't just about overlooking a figure. The issue was doubling down on that decision. You're left with a dilemma. Was Caitlyn justified in shunning the fourth quarter limit since iconic players define big plays? Or were the Fever obligated to play it safe regardless of her momentum? Share your perspective below. Like, subscribe, and let me know where you stand. Because this matchup proves the controversy surrounding Caitlyn Clark's court time is far from over.